Welcome back to Love and Hard Money. I'm Brian. This is episode 11. I do have 8 baby chicks living in my office at the moment. We're trying to keep them warm until they're big enough to go outside, so if there's a little bit of background noise, I will apologize for that in advance. Henry Ford is credited with saying something like, "It is well enough that the people of our nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. If they did," he believed, "there would be a revolution before morning." That was over 100 years ago. The system has gotten more complex since then. More layers, more jargon, more PhDs writing papers to justify it. But the core of what Ford was describing hasn't changed. And I think he was right. Not that there would be violence, but that genuine understanding produces genuine outrage. So today, we're going to attempt to understand it together, because you should be outraged. This episode is designed to be shared. If you have a friend, a sibling, or a coworker who you've been wanting to have this conversation with, but didn't know where to start, send them this one. No prior Bitcoin knowledge required. We're going to start from scratch. 3 parts. First, where do dollars actually come from? Second, what that costs us, and I don't just mean in your wallet. And third, Bitcoin, why it's different, and what you can do about it right now. Let's go. Most people, when they think about where money comes from, picture a big printing press. The government needs money. The government needs money. The mint fires up. Dollars roll off the line. Simple. That's not how it works. The reality is stranger and more consequential. Let's walk through it step by step. The United States government spends more than it collects in taxes every single year, has for decades. To cover the gap, the Treasury issues bonds. Think of a bond as an IOU. The government is essentially saying, lend us money today, we'll pay you back with interest later. Now, who buys those bonds? Sometimes pension funds, sometimes foreign governments, but increasingly the buyer is the Federal Reserve. And here's where it gets interesting. The Federal Reserve doesn't have money sitting in a vault somewhere. When the Fed buys a Treasury bond, it creates the money to buy it digitally from nothing. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually how the system was designed. And the Fed officials have said so plainly in congressional testimony. So, the cycle looks like this. Congress authorizes spending. The Treasury borrows by issuing bonds. The Federal Reserve creates new dollars to buy those bonds, and those dollars flow into the banking system. And then, through a mechanism called fractional reserve lending, the banks multiply them even further. Here's how fractional reserve lending works. When you deposit $1,000 in your bank, the bank is only required to keep a fraction of that on hand. Historically around 10%, though the Fed actually dropped the reserve requirements to 0 in 2020 and haven't reinstated them. The rest, the bank loans out. That borrower deposits their loan proceeds in another bank, which loans out most of that, and so on. $1 of base money created by the Fed can become $10, $15, or $20 circulating in the economy by the time the banking system is done with it. This is why economists talk about money supply. M1, M2, M3, these are all just measures of how many dollars exist in various forms, and that number has gone essentially in one direction for the past century. Up. Dramatically up. Here's a number worth chewing on. In 1971, the year President Nixon ended the last formal link between the dollar and gold, the total U.S. money supply was roughly $600 billion. Today, it's over $21 trillion. The national debt is over $38 trillion, and unfunded liabilities, which is everything we've legally committed to pay for in the future but don't have money or future income for, mostly Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, is in the hundreds of trillions. That's not economic growth. Economic growth produces more goods and services. This is more dollars chasing those goods and services, which is the textbook definition of inflation. And just to close the loop on what this means for you directly, when new money is created and enters the economy, it doesn't raise all prices simultaneously. It flows first to the banks, then to the financial system, then to asset prices, then gradually to consumer goods. The people closest to the money creation benefit first when prices are still low. By the time it reaches your grocery store or your rent check, prices have adjusted upward. Your wages are the last thing to catch up, if they ever do. Economists have a name for this. It's called the Cantillon Effect, after Richard Cantillon, an 18th century economist who noticed that whoever is closest to the money printer wins, and whoever is furthest loses. In modern terms, Wall Street wins. Main Street takes it on the chin, over and over again. That's where dollars come from. Not from productivity, not from value creation, from debt, and from the institutional machinery that allows that debt to be monetized and multiplied. Now, let's talk about what a dollar really costs. Before I get into the specific pathologies I want to name today, I need to give you the conceptual key that unlocks all of them. Economists talk about something called time preference. It's a simple idea. Do you value things now, or are you willing to wait for something better later? A child has a high time preference. They want the candy now, not 2 candies tomorrow. A master craftsman has a low time preference. He spends years developing a skill that will pay off over a lifetime. I think an easier way to think about it is short-term thinking versus long-term planning. Healthy societies, healthy individuals, healthy institutions generally plan far into the future. They invest, they build, they sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term flourishing. Here's what inflation does to time preference. It destroys the incentive to wait. If your money is losing value every year, there's a rational economic case for spending it now, for borrowing, for consuming, for prioritizing the short term over the long term. Why save? The money you save today will buy less tomorrow. Why invest in a business that takes 10 years to mature when you can flip something in 2? The entire architecture of fiat money is a subsidy for short-term thinking, built into the foundation of every economic decision made in this country and in the world. And then we wonder why everything feels cheap, why nothing is built to last, why institutions optimize for the next quarter instead of the next generation. It's not a mystery, it's math. Let's start with something tangible: food. The industrialization of the American food supply didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in a financial environment that systemically rewarded scale, speed, and shelf life, and punished the kind of patient, quality-oriented farming and food production that takes time to build and doesn't lend itself to leveraged roll-ups. The result? A food system optimized for profit extraction over nutrition, seed oils in everything, ultra-processed products engineered for addiction, feedlot animals raised in conditions that would have been unrecognizable and unthinkable to any farmer a century ago. A USDA dietary pyramid shaped as much by agricultural lobbying as by science. And chronic disease rates that are, by any historical standard, catastrophic. Obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, these are not diseases of abundance. They're diseases of a system that found it more profitable to sell you engineered, hyper-palatable food than to feed you well. Short time preference, quarterly earnings, fiat food. The same logic runs through healthcare. A system with long time preference would invest heavily in prevention because keeping people healthy is cheaper and more humane than treating them when they're sick. But prevention doesn't generate recurring income. Chronic disease does. So, we built a system the most expensive in the developed world, that is structurally incentivized to manage illness rather than produce health. Statins instead of metabolic coaching, antidepressants instead of addressing root causes, procedures billed by the unit. There are extraordinary doctors and researchers doing important work. But the system that they operate in, the financial architecture around them, optimizes for billable interventions over durable outcomes. The fiat money system and healthcare system share a feature. They both socialize costs and privatize gains. And the people at the top of both systems, closest to the money, whether it's newly printed currency or insurance reimbursements, do extraordinarily well. The rest of us pay the bill. Fiat money has also damaged our relationships with each other. This one is harder to quantify, but I think it's the most important. Healthy, long-term relationships, marriages, families, communities, require low time preference. They require the willingness to invest, to sacrifice, to delay gratification, to commit to something that won't pay off immediately and may cost you something today. Inflation pressures households in ways that are relentless and underappreciated. Both parents work, not because they necessarily want to, but because one income no longer covers what one income covered a generation ago. Less time at home, more stress, more outsourcing of child rearing to institutions, more dependence on the state. And the culture that fiat money funds, the media, the entertainment, the advertising, is relentlessly short-term in its orientation. Consumption over investment, experience over commitment, self-actualization over sacrifice, hookup culture over marriage. I'm not romanticizing the past, but I do think there's a direct line between a monetary system that punishes savings and patience and a culture that struggles to sustain the long-term commitments that human flourishing actually depends on. Okay, moving on. Art, architecture, music, literature, these are what civilizations leave behind. They're how a society communicates its values to the future, and how it gives meaning to the present. Look around. The architecture of the last 50 years is, with rare exception, brutal, utilitarian, designed and built cheaply, and replaced quickly. Our great-grandparents built courthouses and train stations and libraries meant to last centuries, meant to signal that what happened inside them mattered. We build glass boxes and strip malls, and the public art is horrendous and meaningless. Houses are built to last 30 years, and we're flirting with 50-year mortgages. Come on. The music industry optimizes for streams, which means songs are engineered to hook you in the first 7 seconds. Literary fiction struggles to find an audience while content farms churn out product. Movies are sequels and franchises, intellectual property that can be monetized across 100 SKUs. This is not a coincidence. When capital is abundant and cheap, when money is being printed, it flows into whatever generates returns fastest. Not the 10-year novel, not the cathedral, not the apprenticeship. The fast, the flashy, the financialized. And people feel it. The epidemic of meaninglessness, the anxiety, the nihilism, the sense that nothing is worth building toward. I believe it's downstream of a monetary system that has systemically dismantled the conditions under which meaning is produced. I'll be direct on this next one. The communities hit the hardest by the opioid epidemic are the same communities that were hit the hardest by the deindustrialization of America. Deindustrialization was not simply a matter of technology making certain jobs obsolete. It was accelerated by a financial system that made it far more profitable to move production offshore, financialize the balance sheet, and return capital to shareholders than to invest in American workers and American manufacturing capacity. When the work left, something else left with it. purpose, structure. The sense that your labor mattered and your community had a future. And it's not like the lights turned off in America and turned on in China. Reportedly, the working conditions at Foxconn in China, where iPhones are made, are so bad that they had to put nets around the building to stop people from jumping out the windows. The jobs left because people here wouldn't tolerate working conditions that make record corporate profits possible. Into that void came Oxycontin, then fentanyl. 100,000 deaths per year. And a pharmaceutical industry that, by the way, knew what it was doing and found the short-term profits worth the externalized human cost. How sick is that? This is what high time preference does at a civilizational scale. It extracts. It doesn't build. And the people left behind aren't line items in a quarterly report. Okay, one more. And this one's timely because as I record this, we're weeks into a wildly unpopular war with Iran. Sound money is a constraint on war. When governments have to tax their citizens directly to fund military campaigns, those citizens pay attention. They ask whether the war is worth it. They vote accordingly. Fiat money removes that constraint. I've seen polling that says that 71% of Americans do not support the current war. President Trump campaigned against this war directly because he knew how unpopular it would be. But war can be funded by printing, and that means our vote doesn't change a thing. The cost is distributed invisibly across every dollar holder through inflation. A tax so diffuse and so slow-moving that no one can point to it and say, this is what the war cost me. This, despite the fact that 30 to 40% of our national debt can be tied directly to wars. The result? A country that has been in continuous military conflict for most of the last century. Not because the American people are uniquely warmongering. They're not. But because the monetary system made it possible to externalize the cost of war in a way that prevented the normal democratic check on it. You don't feel the cost of war at the ballot box. You feel it at the grocery store, years later, not knowing why everything is more expensive. And so we argue. We post, we march, we vote harder. Left versus right, red versus blue, a culture war of staggering proportions and exhausting duration. But here is what both parties, every administration, left and right, for over a century have agreed on without a single exception. Spend more than you take in and print the difference. The structure of the system makes political resolution impossible. That's not an accident. It's a feature. The government that can print money to cover its obligations will always print money to cover its obligations. Period. No election changes that calculus. No reform package survives contact with it. Which means the passionate ideologues, and I say this with genuine sympathy because many of them are sincere people who care deeply, are arguing about the distribution of a pie that is being systemically hollowed out. They're fighting over what color to paint the barn that's on fire. And the cynical operators, the ones who actually understand the system and know the problems can't be fixed, aren't even trying. They're just making sure that the newly printed money flows toward their donors and their industries faster than it loses value. They're directing the grift. That's the job of a politician. And in a fiat system, it's a rational one. This is not cynicism on my part. It's the logical behavior of people operating inside a structure that rewards extraction over building things of value. So let me ask a different question. Not who should be in charge of the money printer, but what if the problem is that anyone can be in charge of it in the first place? What if the issue isn't the people running the system, but the existence of the system itself? And what if we could separate money from state? Bitcoin has a different incentive structure. Bitcoin is not a tech company. It's not a bet on a better payment app. Bitcoin is a monetary protocol, a set of rules, enforced not by any government or institution, but by mathematics and a distributed global network that governs the issuance and transfer of a new form of money. And the most important rule is this: there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. No committee can change it. No government can decree more of it into existence. No election can alter it. That's not a marketing claim. It's written into the code, enforced by hundreds of thousands of nodes around the world, each of which independently verifies every transaction and every block. To change the supply cap, you would need to convince an overwhelming majority of those node operators, people in different countries with different interests, speaking different languages, to agree to devalue their own savings. It's never happened. It will never happen. This is the first time in human history that we have had a monetary asset with a genuinely fixed, verifiable, and enforceable supply cap. Think about what that means. Every other form of money in history, gold, silver, seashells, fiat currency, has eventually been inflated. Gold worked well for a long time precisely because it was hard to mine, but it centralized in banks, and banks loaned out more IOUs against gold than existed in their vaults. That's where fractional reserve banking we talked about earlier got its start. Bitcoin is fixed, provably, auditably, permanently. Now, let's come back to time preference, because this is where it gets interesting. Bitcoin does the opposite of what fiat money does. Rather than punishing saving and rewarding spending, Bitcoin rewards patience, because the supply is fixed and the demand has grown, and I believe will continue to grow as more people understand what we've just been talking about. The purchasing power of Bitcoin has a long-term upward bias. Not a straight line, volatility is real, but the direction over meaningful time horizons has been unmistakable. What does it do to your behavior when your money gets harder over time rather than softer? When saving is rational, when waiting is rewarded? It changes everything. You start to think in years and decades rather than quarters. You start to ask whether a purchase is worth it in real terms. You start to invest in things with durable value, skills, relationships, infrastructure, quality, rather than things engineered for quick turnover. I want a boat, but the money I would spend on a boat now, invested into Bitcoin, might buy my kids a marina in the future. So I wait. If my only option was dollars, I'd take the boat now, since the money will be worth less in 5 years, and the boat would be cheaply built anyway, since the manufacturer is trying to outrun the same game. It's all just so fiat. This is what Bitcoiners mean when they talk about low time preference. It's not just philosophy. It's the natural behavioral output of a monetary system that doesn't punish you for thinking long term. Sound money doesn't just change your balance sheet. It changes your mind. Let's talk about the objections to Bitcoin, because they're real and they keep people from looking at this seriously. Bitcoin is volatile. Yes, it is. A new asset class discovering its price over a multi-decade period will be volatile. The question isn't whether the price fluctuates. It's whether the underlying monetary properties are sound. specifically more sound than the alternative that you use today. Those properties are rock solid and the direction of travel is clear. It's going up forever, Laura. Bitcoin is used by criminals. Okay, so is cash, to a far greater degree. Bitcoin is actually one of the most transparent monetary networks ever created. Every transaction is permanently recorded on a public ledger. It is, in many ways, the worst possible money for serious criminals who want to hide their tracks. Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. Thanks, Peter. Neither does a dollar bill. Monetary value is not intrinsic. It's emergent from the properties of the asset and the network of people who recognize those properties. Bitcoin's properties, fixed supply, decentralization, censorship resistance, portability, divisibility, verifiability, are genuinely superior to fiat currency for the purpose of storing and transmitting value. Coin will be replaced by something better. Possibly, but I doubt it. Monetary networks, like languages, exhibit powerful network effects. The larger and more liquid the network, the harder it is to displace. Bitcoin has a 17-year head start, the deepest liquidity, the most secure network, the only credible claim to a truly fixed supply. No other cryptocurrency combines those properties. Several have tried to compete. None have. Bitcoin is a 0-to-1 technology protocol stack, like the internet. No one says, the internet's going to be replaced by TikTok. No, TikTok was built on top of the internet. I want to zoom out for a minute. Everything we talked about in the last section, the fiat food, the broken health system, strained relationships, the ugly culture, opioids, endless wars, the political theater, none of that is inevitable. It's not human nature. It's the emergent behavior of a system with a specific incentive structure, a sick and broken incentive structure. Change the incentives, and over time, not overnight, but over time, behavior changes. A world where money is hard doesn't solve everything. People are still people. Greed is still real. Conflict is still real. But it removes a powerful subsidy on short-term thinking that is, right now, woven into every corner of economic life. It prevents the grift associated with getting yourself as close to the money printer as possible. With hard money, builders get rewarded over extractors. Long-term investment beats financial engineering. Quality outlasts cheap. Communities that produce real value gain relative to those that don't. I run a small business. Nothing glamorous, but every decision I make, whether to take on a new supplier, extend credit to a customer, invest in a new product line, I try to make those through a long time preference lens. What does this look like in 5 years, 10 years? Not, how do I maximize this quarter? Bitcoin didn't give me that disposition, but it has sharpened it. And I think that sharpening is available to anyone who takes the monetary question seriously. So here's your call to action. What do you do with this? First, understand it. If this episode clarified something for you, share it. The Ford quote is right. Understanding is the precondition for everything else. The system benefits from your confusion. Clarity is a quiet act of resistance. If you want to learn more, a good place to start is the video, What's the Problem? By Joe Bryant. There's a link in the show notes. I also suggest the book, The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. Second, protect yourself. You may not be able to change monetary policy, but you can change what you hold. Every dollar parked in a savings account, yielding 0.5% while inflation runs at 4%, is a slow, invisible tax. Every Bitcoin you acquire, regardless of the price today, is a step towards a savings instrument no institution can inflate away from you. You don't need to go all in. Start small. You can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. Learn by doing. Start with an account at a Bitcoin-only exchange like River or Strike. You can get fancy later, but for now, just get off zero and keep learning. Third, think longer. Whatever domain you're in, your business, your family, your craft, ask what the 10-year version looks like. Resist the pressure to optimize for the quarter. Practice low time preference deliberately, even before the monetary system rewards it. The habit is worth building now. Focus on health, wealth, love, and long-term success. Fourth, be clear-eyed about politics. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. If the structure of the monetary system makes political resolution of its downstream harms impossible, then energy spent on electoral salvation is energy not spent building something durable. I'm not saying don't vote. I'm saying don't mistake voting for a solution. Build something that doesn't depend on who wins. And finally, stay humble. I believe deeply in what I've laid out today. I've structured my business and my personal savings around these convictions. But I've also been wrong before. About timing, about details, about things I thought I was sure of. Stay curious, keep reading, and let the best argument win, even if it's not yours. That's what this show is for. Henry Ford said people mustn't understand the monetary system. I think that was the most consequential sentence of the 20th century, and not in a good way. But here's what I believe. When people truly understand where money comes from, they don't just get angry. They get motivated. They start to see the connections, the food, the health, the culture, the war, the politics. It all resolves into a single picture, and the picture has a single root. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. More importantly, you can act on it. Not by waiting for a politician to fix it, not by winning an argument on the internet, but by making different decisions, one at a time, starting today. One wallet, one conversation, one business decision made with a longer time horizon. That's how the world actually changes, not from the top down, from the bottom up. Thanks for listening to Love and Hard Money. If this episode resonated with you, please send it to someone who needs to hear it. That's the whole point of this one. Until next time, love your people, hold hard money, and stay sovereign.